Our scripture reading this morning comes from Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? How is it that you have no faith?" They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
The song that we just sang was originally named "Peace, Be Still." It was written in 1874 by a lady named Mary Ann Baker. And she wrote it as a result of a request for a song on this scripture. They were gathering songs for particular scriptures in Jesus' life, and they asked her to write this song in regard to this powerful text. "Master, the tempest is raging. The billows are tossing high. The sky is overshadowed with darkness. No shelter or help is nigh. Carest thou not that we perish? How canst thou lie asleep, when each moment so madly is threatening a grave in the angry deep?" You know, this morning, I think that I want us to make application to our lives from this powerful text. This powerful text that inspired such a beautiful song. I want us to consider the text that was read. Go ahead and open your Bibles to Mark chapter 4 if you want to follow along. You know, in verse 1 we see that there's a great multitude of people that gathered around Jesus on this day and wanting to hear Him preach. And the crowd was so large that Jesus sat them down. And then He went out into a boat a little ways and began to teach them from the Sea of Galilee in that boat just off the shore. This put enough distance between Him and the multitudes that they were able to hear Him. It is believed, and there is a place in tradition, there's no real evidence of it being the actual location, but there is a small cove in this area of the Sea of Galilee. They call it the Sower's Cove. And it is kind of U-shaped, it's kind of fan-shaped, and it's very possible that's the kind of place that Jesus was doing this teaching, if you think about it. Because He could set the people down, He could go out a little bit into the middle of that cove, and the people would be set all around Him, very much like our fanned auditoriums today. Because you can fit more people around a speaker in that kind of a situation. And so He sets them down all around this cove, and then He goes out in the boat, and He's in the middle of this group, and they're kind of, the hills rise up from the Sea of Galilee, and so it's almost like a theater seating, as we would say today, rising up. And so it would be easy for His voice to reach everybody. He sets them down because if they're all standing, it's very hard for people to hear. The human voice doesn't go through a lot of human bodies very far before it gets lost. And so Jesus makes the best possible situation for everyone to hear His teaching on that day. I told you about that cove. It's called the Sower's Cove because of what Jesus taught them on this day. He taught them 3 parables that we have recorded, and they are all farming type parables. The parable of the sower, which we know very well, the parable of the seed, and the parable of the mustard seed He tells to these people as He stands in that boat and teaches them all around Him that day. Well, when evening came, Jesus and His disciples left in that boat to cross the short distance to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. I think sometimes we get this image in our mind of the Sea of Galilee. You can't see from one side to the other, but you can. We would call it, if it was over in Texas, we'd call it a big lake. But they call it a sea. But they crossed over they were crossing over the short distance to the other side. Verse 37 tells us that a sudden storm came upon the Sea of Galilee that evening. And it's not necessarily a storm as we might think about it with thunder and lightning and rain. I think when we hear that word, we immediately go to that place and we see all those kind of things in the imagery. But in verse 37 it says, and there arose a fierce gale of wind. John chapter 6 and verse 18, John talking about another time that they're in a storm on the Sea of Galilee, when Jesus is walking in the water and Peter gets out and walks to him, says the sea began to be stirred up because a strong wind was blowing. When we go over there and we consider the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee sits 690 feet below sea level. It's a part of that Jordan Valley that's going down toward the Dead Sea, the lowest place below sea level on earth. And it's at 690 feet below sea level, but just north of the Sea of Galilee is Mount Horeb. That's the highest point in all of Israel at 9,230 feet above sea level. And I want you to think about this, that the winds come down off of Mount Horeb. They begin to actually pick up speed coming down the mountain. And then they enter into the Jordan Valley, which narrows. And as it narrows, those winds pick up speed as they get compressed into this smaller area now, almost like what we have that happens in jet engines today, that you take air in the front, you compress it down, and you shoot it out the back at a higher speed because of that compression. That's how these winds will come off of Mount Horeb, and it increases that velocity. I can remember when we lived in Colorado one time, we were driving in the mountains, and out of nowhere, I got hit by a wind at the back right side of my car that nearly lifted the car and threw us off the road. Coming out of one of the valleys. Wind coming out of there like a jet stream coming out. I remember when we lived just off the front range, and wind would come out of the passes right there as you go into the mountains, and they'd come out with such strength that even with good windows, it would blow your blinds, and you'd hear the whole place creak. Wind comes out of mountains very fast because of this compression idea. And that's what's happening at the Sea of Galilee. They burst upon the sea with a gale force, and they turn the water instantly into a maelstrom of white-capped large waves. It still happens today. Just 2 weeks before Jonah and I were on the Sea of Galilee, 2 young Israeli boys were in their little boat on the Sea of Galilee, and one of these winds came off Mount Horeb, flipped their boat, threw it away from them, and they both drowned just 2 weeks before we were there. So it still happens today. The sea is still tossed by these gales of wind that come out of nowhere and suddenly. I have in the past probably misrepresented these storms, talking about the rain and the lightning. But it doesn't seem that such things were necessarily present. At least, they may have been, but they're not mentioned. The wind and the waves were very present, though, and there is a real danger to one's life if they are on the sea during such a moment as this. And while the waves beat against the boat, Jesus is in the stern. He's in the rear of the boat, and he's sleeping on a cushion. I know from my standpoint how worn out I am by the end of Sunday. By the time I teach Bible class and preach 2 sermons, Sunday night I'm pretty tired, pretty mentally not all that great. But, I understand that. Jesus, in this particular case, has been teaching all day. He's been preaching all day, and I can imagine to some degree how tired he had to be and how worn out he was as he laid down there in the back of that boat to rest from a hard day of labor and teaching His Word. You know, the disciples in this moment of panic ask an incredibly dumb question. I mean, the ignorance and the stupidity, really, behind this question is amazing. Do you not care that we are perishing, is the question they asked Jesus on that day. And it's dumb for a number of reasons. Number one, they have seen Jesus perform many great miracles. But I think one of the problems in this particular moment on the Sea of Galilee is that all these other miracles that they've seen Jesus do was in regard to other people's problems. It's very easy to think that answers for other people just simply are not good enough for us. And I think the disciples saw Him do all these miracles. They were always about other people. And now it's their problem. And they're panicking. And they're forgetting what Jesus has already demonstrated that He's capable of doing. They also look around and see that for Jesus to fix this problem, He's going to have to control the enormous power of nature. Another reason that the question was dumb was they know that Jesus cares. Do you not care that we're perishing? Well, of course Jesus cares. It is core to who Jesus is. It is overwhelmingly an obvious trait in Jesus' life, and yet their panic has them thinking only of what is happening to them. And I think every one of us can relate to the disciples in this moment, that in moments of frustration or despair, that we've probably said things that we wouldn't normally say. We've probably said things before we really thought, and we really regretted those moments. And that's where the disciples are when they say this. Also, it's a dumb question because Jesus is also in the boat. So if they perish, He perishes, right? I mean, I don't think they're thinking about it like that. Once again, their fixation on themselves has blinded them to an obvious truth that is right before them, that Jesus is in this same boat with them that is being tossed there on the Sea of Galilee. Well, Jesus woke from His much-needed rest, and He rebuked the wind, and He told the sea, "Hush," or "Peace, be still." And really there is two miracles here, and I don't want us to miss this because we often just say one miracle, but there are two miracles that take place in two statements by Jesus. He wakes up and He rebukes the wind. Now the wind is the cause. The wind is why there are waves on the Sea of Galilee. So He rebukes the wind. He stops the wind. But just because the wind stopped doesn't mean the waves stop immediately, right? Because the waves will keep going until all the energy that is in a wave is expended. And so then He tells the sea to be still. That's the second miracle. Stops the wind, then He makes the sea completely calm immediately. He controls the water. There's also a third miracle that sometimes we miss as well, that the Bible tells us that immediately after doing this, they were where they were going. In other words, they miraculously moved from wherever they were in the storm to the location that they were going to instantly at the time that Jesus did this particular miracle. But we see that there are two miracles here as He stops the wind and then He calms the sea around them. Jesus then turned to His disciples. They had questions. He has questions, doesn't He? Why were you afraid? Really? Why were you afraid? Jesus asked them. How is it? You know, with all that you've seen, and I'm adding to this, but how is it with all that you've seen, all that I have demonstrated, all that you know in regard to who I am, how is it that you have no faith? That's powerful questions. It's rebuking questions for these men that were closest to Him. When you consider their statement about perishing and Jesus not caring, we see that they have completely lost faith in Jesus in this moment of fear. Matthew has Jesus saying to them, "Why do you have so little faith?" In other words, why? I don't think it's completely gone, but clearly Matthew gives us the instance where Jesus says, "Your faith has gotten really small." You let this fear and this storm take your faith and squeeze it down into something that's almost insignificant. Luke has Jesus asking, where is your faith? I know it's there somewhere, but it's not showing, right? Where is it? Why aren't you acting like people that have faith? Why are you acting like a person who has none whatsoever? Those are very good questions. I want us to consider how this event has application then upon our lives. First, life has its storms. We just have to accept that. There are times, quite frankly, when life is just plain frightening. And it causes us to want to hide somewhere from it, to get away, to do anything but face it. The waves are going to beat against our boat of life, and we are going to take on enough difficulties like water that we, just like the disciples, are going to be afraid that we're going to perish, that we just can't make it, that we just can't survive it. And we may even let that affect our faith to the point that we go, Jesus, don't you care? Don't you care about what's happening to me? Don't you care that I'm perishing? And we may ask the same kind of dumb questions that the disciples ask. Folks, we live in a fallen in a sinful world, and we suffer at the hands of evil men and evil sin in and of itself. And the storms of life are not reserved only for bad people. That is the purpose of the entire book of Job, is it not? To really illustrate to us that God does allow things to happen to even good people, things that are very difficult, things that are horrible. The storm in Job's life was so great that it's hard to fully imagine what that man went through, and God allowed that to happen. That's really what the book is teaching us, that good people do suffer these kind of storms in life. But even more, if we look at the storm in our text, disciples were good guys. And they were in the boat with the best person that's ever lived on this earth. And yet, there was a storm. And Jesus has in His future a storm at the cross at Golgotha that is beyond what you and I will ever face in our lives. He will suffer and die for us. Yes, bad things happen to good people because of the sin that this world has within it. Living this life requires that we endure some storms. So let's understand that so we're not surprised by the reality of it when the storms actually come upon our lives, that we don't go, I can't believe this is happening. Well, you need to believe it's happening because it happens to everyone. It happens to the good, the bad, and the ugly. It'll happen to anyone out there. Second, we need to remember that it is very easy, just like with the disciples, it's easy to panic in the midst of our storms. The disciples panicked, and it caused them to lose their faith in Jesus, to say and to do things that they normally would not have said, things that they normally would not have done. In Exodus chapter 14, we see that the Israelites were at the Red Sea. And they had this water in front of them. They had Egyptian forts on each side of them. And they had the Egyptian army behind them. They had nowhere to go. And it was a bad day for them as they saw it. They were literally, as the old song from the 1930s said, between the devil and the deep blue sea. What were they going to do? Many of them panicked in fear, but Moses' faith held strong. Moses didn't panic on that day. He didn't lose control of his life and of his decisions and of his faith on that particular day. And he told those panicking people, do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of the Lord. Folks, when we're in our storm, we need to listen to Moses and not panic, not fear, and just wait and stand by and see how the Lord delivers His people. Because He will. Why? Because, well, simply put, He loves us. And He cares for us. I want us to realize that in the case of these Israelites, God told them to go right where they were at. God purposely put them in an uncomfortable position to allow them to show, or in some cases, not to show their faith. Then He showed them His deliverance. Faith is about trust. God says, you don't trust me in this moment, you're panicking. Let me show you why you should trust me. And the waters part. Jesus on the cross is showing you, He is showing me why I should trust Him because of what He has done for me there. Jesus showed deliverance as well to His disciples. After they showed this lack of faith, after they were panicking, Jesus arose from His sleeping and He delivered them. If they had just stopped and waited, Jesus would have delivered them no matter what. They didn't have to panic to get Jesus to act. If they were in real danger and if they were about to sink, I guarantee you, they'd have seen the deliverance of the Lord still. Third, peace can be found even while you're in the storm, even in the very midst of the storm. Have you ever asked, how could Jesus be sleeping in this, right? I mean, boats, on big waves, they get kind of wild and woolly. And those boats held about 15 people, so you got 13 in there. So it's a full boat. And it's all over the place. It's not a big boat. It's not like a big cruise ship or something that you barely feel the waves in. This thing is rocking and rolling over the sea. And Jesus is back there on his cushion, and he is sound asleep. I remember in some movie, it was a war movie, and there was one soldier that was sleeping when none of the others could. And they said, well, how does he sleep? They said, well, because he's a Christian, because he's got faith, right? You can sleep through anything. You have that peace about you. But I think, in this case with Jesus knew how the story ended. He didn't panic. He wasn't fearful. He knew the end of the story. He knew what was to come. And so there's a peace in that. He had a peace in that knowledge even when the winds were blowing and the waves were beating on the boat. 2 Kings chapter 6, verses 13 through 17, we see Elisha and his servant is absolutely losing his mind. They're in the city of Dothan because there's an army. The Aramean army is all around the city, and Elisha's just calm. Because Elisha knows. He trusts. And he prays to God to have the servant's eyes open, and the servant's eyes are opened, and surrounding the army of the Arameans was the army of angels. And everything was fine. See, when we have faith in God and trust in what He's already told us is going to happen, we're going to find ourselves in a much better place in these storms. Peaceful place. Go back to Daniel chapter 3 and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they, the king gave them one more chance. They didn't bow the first time to his great image, and the king said, I'm going to give you one more chance. I like you guys. I'm going to give you one more chance to bow down to this image before I have them throw you in the furnace, right? Listen to what these three young men said to the most powerful man who's threatening to throw them in a fiery furnace. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. Basically, you know us. You know we're not going to do this. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from this furnace of blazing fire, and He will deliver us out of your hand. Now there is people who understand the end of the story, right? If God wants, we completely trust and have no doubt that He can deliver us from the furnace. And not only from the furnace, King, you can't even do anything to us. Because God is a God we trust. But that's not all they said, right? Then they said, but even if He does not. Oh, there it is, right? Now, we want God to do things we want, right? I want it to turn out the way I want it to turn out. But folks, that's not always God's plan. And God's plan is always best. But it may not always be exactly what I want. God's plan for Jesus was to go to the cross in Gethsemane. That wasn't really what He wanted. But it was the best plan for you and me. It was the best plan for all time. But listen to what they said. But even if He does not, let it be known to you, O King, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. No panic, just faith, just a peace and a trust in God in the middle of a life or death storm for these three men. So we look at them and we say, you know what, I may be in a storm right now, and it may be whatever the storm may be. There's a plethora, and you can't number all the storms that life can throw at us. I may be in a storm right now, but I can tell you right now, God knows I'm in a storm. And if I'm His child, He's in the boat with me. And I find peace in that. And whether He delivers me in the way that I hope to be delivered or not, like Job said, blessed be the name of the Lord. I'll find peace in Him with whatever the outcome may be. Folks, we know the end. Sometimes we're so fixated on whether, well, what if I lose my life? What if I die? We know the end, and even as we face the storms of death, we know what's on the other side. And if we really trust in that, we can even endure that dark storm with a peace that comes from the faith that God gives us. And lastly, Jesus can give great calm. Faith and fear are opposed to each other. They are like oil and water. They simply do not mix with each other. And the greater our faith, the smaller our fears. And likewise, the greater our fears, the smaller our faith. Oh, ye have little faith. Where is your faith? Why didn't you have any faith? Because I was consumed with fear. Faith can't live there. And so one or the other is going to win out in our lives. And the greater our faith, the smaller those fears will be that will paralyze us and cause us to panic. People do those trust fall exercises. They never wanted me to fall. I think it's because they don't want to try to catch me. But you get up there and you're going to fall back, and not just those that are on the ground, but the ones where they put you up on the platform, right? And you're falling down a good long ways into arms of people that are supposed to catch you. And it's about, do you trust Him to catch you? Do you trust Jesus to catch you in your life? Are you willing to fall into His arms? Even if you don't always know what's going to happen. In Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, but He guides me through those valleys of deep darkness. Because I trust His rod and His staff. I find comfort in them. I find peace in them. Jesus is the good shepherd. And will we follow Him? Will we follow Him even when He says, I want you to go to this dark place where all the bad things are, but trust that I have a staff in my hand that will protect you? Do we do that? That's what David was saying. That's what the Psalm's about. It's how God takes care of us. There was one time a man who strung a rope across Niagara Falls. And some people started watching him. He was putting the rope out there. And all of a sudden he hopped out there and he walked right across it. Just all the way across it. Came all the way back. And they all applauded and thought that was great. And he got a wheelbarrow and he said, do you think I can wheel this wheelbarrow across that line? Some people said, yeah, but everybody's still a little bit, wasn't real sure about this. So, boy, he took that wheelbarrow right across, come right back again. He goes, do you think I could put a person in this wheelbarrow and take them across? Oh, yeah, now they're excited. Now they think, man, this guy's got skill. Oh, yeah, absolutely. He said, I need a volunteer. Now, there's where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Oh, yeah, you can wheel somebody in that wheelbarrow, but just not me. Don't have quite that much faith. Do we trust Jesus to carry us across? To be there for us? With Jesus there to catch us, to carry us over, or to still our storms? We can endure any storm that this life has. Our faith in Him will determine everything. And may He never have to ask any of us here this morning, where's your faith? Why is your faith so small? Do you not have any at all? But may He commend us for the faith that we have as we look to Him and Him alone. Life, it's not easy. And contrary to the televangelist, there's not a page in the Bible that ever said it would be. Jesus called the life that we live as Christians the narrow way, a difficult path to walk. Jesus said, I do not come to bring peace. I bring the sword. Brother will turn on brother. Family will turn on family. Christian life is hard. The Apostle Paul told Timothy that all who believe in Christ will suffer persecution. Look at all the prophets and then the Christians that followed, that the persecution and the mistreatment that they endured. The Bible isn't telling you life's easy. The Bible's showing you page after page after page that this life, because of sin, going all the way back to Adam and Eve, because of sin, this life is hard, but God's got the solution for it. And He's got the power and the ability to take care of you even in the most difficult times. I guess at the end of the day, we have to see Jesus. See His suffering. And ask, why should I be any... Why am I think I'm so special that somehow I can live this life and never have a storm when Jesus had to go through such terrible storms? I certainly don't deserve it. The sin in my life has caused me to deserve everything I get. But Jesus gives me an opportunity to survive the storms and to overcome the sin that I have committed. This morning, let us commit. Let us commit to a faith in Jesus that can face the storms. Let's commit ourselves to the faith that holds strong in prosperity and the faith that holds strong in poverty. A faith that holds strong in good health and when our health falls completely apart. A faith that is strong in pleasure and a faith that is strong in suffering. A faith that is strong in life and a faith that is strong at the point of death. In all circumstances, may our lives never doubt God. Never doubt Jesus, but instead glorify Him in the faith that we have to deliver us from any storm this life may throw at us. Paul spoke about this same faith when he said in Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means. I know also how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through Jesus who strengthens me." There's the secret. Faith in Jesus. The same secret that the disciples needed in that boat. That we can't be sunk because Jesus is right there. He's at the very center of our lives. Paul was in a storm when he wrote those words. He was in a storm of imprisonment and persecution, but yet he was content. He found peace in his faith that he had in Jesus to still even that storm in his life. And he has that same peace when he writes 2 Timothy and he's about to be put to death. He's still unshakable. Because it doesn't matter the storm, it only matters who's in the boat. And whether Jesus is there. Because no boat is sunk that has Jesus in it. The disciples ask, after seeing Jesus still the wind and the waves, they asked that question, didn't they? Who is this that even the wind and sea obey Him. You answer that question in your life, and it will change you. When you really believe and understand the answer to that question, who is He that can do that? Then it will change you. Because it will enable you to see Jesus for who He is. That He is God. And that nothing is beyond His ability. Jesus, hopefully, is in our boat with us. And if He is, our boat will never sink, no matter how great the storm may be, because He is the master, as the song says, of earth and sky. May He be the master as well of your life. May you live life with a faith that never panics, but always finds peace in the fact that you know that He's in it and that He's right there. And may you never ask, does He care? Because you know and you trust that He does. And because He does, and because you trust and know that, you know that whatever storm you're in, He's right there with you. And He cares. And He will help. Just don't panic. Do as Moses said. Hold on. Wait. And you will see the deliverance of the Lord. Folks, we're all going to see that one day. If you remain faithful as a Christian, one day you'll get past all the storms of this life and you will see the ultimate deliverance of the Lord as we all go home to heaven. And how great that will be. Just hang on. Just wait and know that He's there. This morning, if you're not a child of God and you don't have that hope and you're not going to find that peace as you too face the storms that come in this life, then you can come to Jesus today. You can put Him in your boat, the boat of your life. And as you go across the sea of this life, whether you're in storm or in calm seas, you can know that you are safe in Him. You can do that this morning by obeying the gospel. If you're a child of God and maybe you're like the disciples, maybe your life's gotten a little bit tumultuous and you just panicked and He don't care. Why don't you care about me? What are you doing, God? Stop. Remember who you're talking to. That He's the master of the sky and the sea. And He can change everything. Come back to Him. Trust Him. Calm down and find peace in Him. We can help you this morning in doing that. We hope and pray that you will let us. Why don't you come as we stand, as we sing. Rise up and build in the name of